The hammer driving the oak stake into the dry ground was the only sound besides the wind. It was a flat, final sound, like a gavel ending a trial. Nathaniel Burke watched the surveyor, a man in a dusty bowler hat named Sims, pull his line taut and squint toward the horizon. Each stake was a punctuation mark on a story Nate was desperate to end. One more week, 7 days. He would ride into town, meet Frank Garrison at the land office, sign the papers, and the rocking bee ranch would no longer be his. The name, his father's, would be scraped off the land records, and Nate Burke would be a ghost. He'd have a pocket full of bank drafts and a train ticket east. So far east that the air would be thick and wet and he would never smell sagebrush or dust again. The wind was relentless. It had been blowing for 3 days, a high, thin whine from the north that scraped a man's nerves raw. It tugged at the brim of Nate's hat and pushed dust into the folds of his neckerchief. He tasted grit on his teeth. He looked past Sims to the low brown hills that marked his property line. His land. It had been his father's, and his. Now it was just dirt, marked for sale. There were no cattle to graze it. He'd sold the last of the herd 6 months prior, just enough to pay the taxes and the feed bills he owed at the general store. The barn stood empty. The bunkhouse was full of shadows. His own ranch house, built of sturdy pine his father had hauled from the mountains, was just a cold box where he slept. He was 34 years old and felt 100. This land, this high, harsh Wyoming territory, had taken everything from him. It took his father with a cough that turned bloody. It took his mother with a grief that starved her. And 2 years ago, it took Jed. The surveyor waved, his calculations done. Nate just nodded, not moving from his spot by the porch. He watched Sims pack his tripod and his chains, load them into his wagon, and drive off, leaving a pale plume of dust that the wind tore apart immediately. Leaving. The word was a prayer. He saddled his horse, a big roan that was the last living thing on the ranch he gave a damn about, and rode toward town. He didn't need supplies. He had enough coffee and salt pork to last the week. He went out of a grim habit, a need to see the place he was leaving, to remind himself why. The town of Laramie Fork was huddled by the river, a collection of false-fronted buildings bracing against the wind. As he rode down the main street, he felt the change. Men stopped talking. Eyes slid away from him. He was used to it. He was the man who had let his brother die. He swung down in front of Henderson's Mercantile and looped the reins over the hitching post. The bell above the door jangled, a cheerful sound in a dead-quiet room. Elias Henderson was behind the counter, polishing a pair of spectacles. "Mr. Burke," he said. His voice was polite. It was always polite. It was the politeness of a man speaking to a leper. Henderson. Nate moved past the pickle barrel. The store smelled of coffee beans, cured leather, and lye soap. "Just looking," Nate said, knowing he didn't need anything. He picked up a can of peaches, weighed it in his hand, and put it back down. Mrs. Davies, the preacher's wife, was at the far end of the store, examining bolts of calico. She saw him, and her face pinched. She turned her back to him. A deliberate, sharp movement. Nate felt the familiar burn in his gut. 2 years. 2 years since the range war with the graders, men hired by the railroad who claimed grazing rights they didn't own. 2 years since Jed, 19 and full of fire, had ridden out with him to cut their fences. They'd been ambushed. Nate had taken a bullet in the shoulder, but Jed had taken one in the chest. Nate had carried his brother's body back to town, draped over this same roan, and the town had looked at him, the older brother, the one who should have known better, and blamed him. He hadn't pulled the trigger, but he had led his brother to the bullet. He hadn't been able to save him. The guilt was a physical weight, a stone in his belly he'd carried every day since. He didn't blame them. He blamed himself more. He bought a small bag of tobacco he didn't want, paid Henderson, and left. The bell jangled his exit. He stood on the boardwalk, rolling a cigarette with stiff fingers, the wind whipping the paper. He wouldn't miss this. He wouldn't miss the cold eyes, the whispers, the empty space that surrounded him like a shroud. He was halfway back to his ranch, cutting across the low saddle that separated his land from the neighboring homestead, when he saw her. Clara Dunning. She was standing by the tumbled ruin of her barn, not 20 yards from his property line. She was just standing there, hands on her hips, staring at the mess. He tried to ride past. He was close enough to see the hard line of her jaw. He was done with neighbors, done with their troubles. "Burke!" Her voice was sharp, and it carried on the wind. It wasn't a plea, it was a summons. He pulled the roan to a halt. He didn't turn, just waited. She strode toward him, her skirts kicking up dust. She wasn't a tall woman, but she moved like she was. She stopped a few feet from his horse, forcing him to look down at her. Her face was chapped by the wind, and her light brown hair was pulled back in a severe knot, but strands had escaped and whipped around her face. "You see that?" she said. It wasn't a question. She pointed to the barn. The back half of the roof had caved in, a tangle of splintered beams and snow-flattened shingles. "I see it," Nate said. "It came down in the night. The snow load was too much." Nate said nothing. He wanted to be gone. This was not his concern. "I've got 2 horses in the standing half, and my milk cow. That side won't last another storm. And winter isn't over. Not by a long shot." He looked at the sky. It was a pale, cold gray. She was right. More snow was coming. "That's a shame, Mrs. Dunning." His voice was rough. He cleared his throat. She looked at him, and her eyes, the color of winter grass, were sharp. "A shame isn't going to keep my stock from freezing. I need help. I'm not a carpenter." "You built your own barn, didn't you? Your father and you." He flinched. She knew. Of course she knew. In this valley, everyone knew everything. "I'm busy, ma'am. I'm packing." "Packing," she said the word like it tasted bad. "I heard you sold out to Garrison, so you're just going to ride off and leave this here?" "It's my land to sell." "And that's my barn to fix." She took a step closer. He could smell the lye soap on her skin. "I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Burke. I can't pay you in cash, but I'll trade. I have canned goods. I'll work for you. I'll mend your clothes for your trip. Whatever you want." He looked away from her. At the ruined barn. It was a disaster. It was more than one person could fix, and it was barely a 2-person job. He thought of his empty week. 7 days of staring at the walls, waiting. He hated it. He hated her for asking. He hated this land for breaking her barn. He hated himself for the small, stupid flicker of something. Not pity, just recognition. She was in a trap, and she was trying to chew her way out. "I'm leaving, Mrs. Dunning. In 1 week, I'm signing the papers." "1 week is all I'm asking for. Help me salvage it. Just help me get a roof, any roof, over that standing stall before the next storm. After that, you can go to blazes for all I care." Her honesty was as harsh as the wind. He looked down at her. She was breathing hard, her chin up, daring him to refuse. She was proud, and this was costing her every ounce of it. He let out a long breath. The dust plumed from his lips. "Tomorrow," he said, the word torn from him. "I'll come by at first light, but I'm not promising miracles. That's a teardown, not a repair." She visibly relaxed, though her expression didn't soften. "First light, and bring your good saw." She turned and marched back to her house without another word, without a thank you. Nate watched her go, then nudged the roan into a walk, angry at himself, and angry at her, and at the whole damn territory. He arrived the next morning as a pale yellow light broke over the eastern hills. The wind had died, leaving a dead, frozen cold. Clara's homestead was a testament to stubbornness. It was run down. The paint scoured off the small cabin, but it was orderly. The fences were mended with a mix of wire and rope, but they were upright. A small garden patch was covered in a neat mound of straw for the winter. Her husband, Arthur Dunning, had been gored by a bull 2 years back. A freak thing. He'd been a quiet man, prone to bad luck. Nate had heard. He'd also heard about their boy. Thomas died last year, fever. Nate knew that kind of quiet, the quiet of a house that's had its heart torn out. She was already outside, wearing a man's canvas coat, dragging splintered beams from the wreckage. She didn't pause when he rode up. "Coffee's on the stove," she said, grunting as she heaved a piece of timber. "It's cold." He dismounted and tied his horse. He walked over to the wreckage. It was worse up close. The main support beam had snapped clean in two. He worked with a grim, silent focus. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to talk. He just wanted to sweat until he was too tired to think. Clara worked beside him. She was strong. She lifted boards he wouldn't have thought she could. Her face set in a mask of determination. She didn't wince from the hard labor. She didn't complain. She just worked, her breath pluming in the cold air. They spent the first day just tearing down. They pulled apart the collapsed roof, saving every board that wasn't split or rotten. He taught her how to use the pry bar to draw nails without breaking the wood. She learned fast. She didn't flinch. They barely spoke. "Pass the hammer. Hold this. That one's rotten." At midday, she went inside and brought out 2 tin mugs of hot coffee and 2 thick slices of bread with apple butter. They sat on a log, not looking at each other, and ate. The silence was heavy. "Your husband," Nate started, not knowing why. "Gored," she said flatly, staring at the barn. "Stupidest thing. He tripped. The bull wasn't even mad, just surprised." She took a sip of coffee. "And my boy, fever, last winter." "I know," Nate said. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix a roof, mister. Burke." She stood up. Her meal finished. "Let's get back to it." He found himself watching her, the way she moved, the economy of her strength. She was a woman whittled down to her essential self. There was no softness left, or maybe there was, and she just buried it too deep to see. By the 3rd day, they had a plan. They'd salvaged enough timber to frame a simple lean-to roof over the standing stalls. It wouldn't be pretty, but it would hold snow. He found himself thinking beyond the repair, pointing out where she should bank the foundation with sod before the real deep freeze. He was nailing a crossbeam, his arm aching, when the frustration of it hit him. This pointless, hard, endless work. This land. He missed the nail, smashing his thumb. He cursed, loud and bitter, dropping the hammer. It clattered down the boards. Clara looked up from the ground, where she was sawing a plank. "You all right?" "No, I'm not all right," he snapped. He shook his hand, pain shooting up his arm. "This is pointless. This whole place. We fix this, and the wind will just tear it down again, or the snow will break it, or the drought will dry it up and the fires will burn it." He jumped down from the frame, landing hard. He paced, kicking at a pile of splintered wood. "I can't stand this place anymore. I hate it. I hate the dust. I hate the wind. I hate the emptiness." He stopped, breathing hard, looking at her. He hadn't said this much to another soul in 2 years. "Everything I ever had," he said, his voice dropping. "Everything I ever loved. It turned to dust here. My father, my mother, my brother. It takes and it takes, and it doesn't give anything back." Clara stood up slowly, brushing sawdust from her coat. She looked at him, her face calm. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't offering pity. "It doesn't promise to give anything back," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It just is. We're the ones who come here looking for promises. We're the fools, not the land." He stared at her. Her simple, hard truth hit him harder than any sympathy could have. She was right. He had believed in the promise. Jed had his father had, and they were all gone. "Maybe you're right," he said, his anger draining away, leaving only the familiar cold weariness. "But I'm done with it. I'm done being a fool." He bent and picked up the hammer. "Let's finish this." They worked until the sun was a red smear in the west, and the patch was done. It was ugly, a mismatch of weathered boards and new-cut pine, but it was solid. He'd braced it against the main wall. It would hold. He was packing his tools in the twilight, the cold seeping into his bones. He was exhausted, but it was a clean tired, a physical tired, not the sick weariness of his grief. "You'll stay for dinner?" He turned. She was standing in the cabin doorway. The yellow light from her lamp spilled out around her, making a silhouette of her small, straight frame. It wasn't a question. It was the same command she'd used to ask for his help. He was hungry. The thought of his own cold cabin, of opening another can of beans, was bleak. He hadn't eaten a hot meal he hadn't cooked himself since Jed died. He found himself nodding. "All right, I'll see to my horse." Inside, her cabin was one room, but it was warm and clean. A fire crackled in the hearth. A simple stew bubbled in a pot over the fire, smelling of root vegetables and bacon. A kerosene lamp on the table cast a soft, steady glow. He washed his hands in a basin of cold water she'd set out. He sat at the small, scrubbed pine table. She ladled the stew into 2 bowls and cut thick slices from a dark loaf of bread. They ate in silence. But it was a different silence than the one in the barn. It wasn't the silence of hard work. It was the quiet of 2 people who were too tired and too lonely to bother with small talk. The stew was hot. It warmed him from the inside out. He watched her in the firelight. The harshness of the day was gone from her face. He saw the fine lines around her eyes, the way her chapped lips were pressed together. She wasn't pretty, not in the way of the painted women in the saloons. But there was a strength in her face that was more than pretty. It was real. She looked up, caught him watching. He looked away, back at his bowl. "It's good stew," he said. "It's just stew," she replied. When they were done, he helped her clear the plates. It felt strange, standing in her small, warm space. Domestic. It felt like a life he had forgotten existed. "Well," he said, drying his hands, "the roof should hold." "It will," she said. He should leave. It was dark. He had nothing more to say. He put on his coat and hat, his movements stiff. He walked to the door. "I'll go up and check the bracing," he said. It was an excuse. He didn't know why he made it. He just wasn't ready to step back out into the cold dark. He went to the barn. The horses and the cow were in their stalls, chewing hay, their warmth fogging the air. He climbed the ladder to the hayloft. The smell of old hay and new-cut pine was thick. Moonlight streamed through the gaps in the boards, striping the floor. He walked over to the new beams, put his weight on them. Solid. He heard the ladder creak. He turned. Clara was climbing up into the loft. She stood at the top, her hair undone, falling over the collar of her coat. She walked toward him, stopping just a few feet away. They stood in the quiet, breathing in the cold air, listening to the animals shift below. "Thank you, Nate," she said. Her voice was low, different than it had been in the yard. He just nodded, his throat tight. He could feel the heat of her body in the small space. She stepped closer. The moonlight lit one side of her face. He saw a sudden clarity in her eyes, a decision. She was tired. He saw it now. She wasn't just tired from the work. She was tired of the silence, tired of the cold, tired of being alone. She put her hand on his chest. His heart hammered against her palm. Then she raised herself up on her toes and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a kiss of thanks. It was a kiss of pure, desperate hunger. Her lips were chapped, but they were hot. She kissed him like she was starving, like she was trying to draw the very breath from his lungs. It was a kiss that said she was done with grieving and done with being quiet. He was so shocked. He couldn't move. His entire world, his plan, his cold, empty future, it all shattered. He tasted the salt of her skin, the faint taste of the coffee they had shared. His hands came up, grabbing her arms. He pushed her back, breaking the kiss. He made a small, rough sound in his throat. He pulled away, breathing hard, his mind reeling. But he didn't let go. His fingers dug into the rough canvas of her coat. He hadn't pulled away far, only inches. He stared at her in the moon-striped darkness, and she stared back, her chest rising and falling, her eyes wide and dark and utterly without fear. He did not pull her closer. He did not leave. They stood in the cold moonlight, his hands locked on her arms, his breath ragged. Her kiss had been an assault, a desperate claim that bypassed every wall he had built. It was the first human touch he had truly felt in 2 years, and it burned like a brand. Clara did not look away. She did not apologize. She simply stood in his grip, her own breathing unsteady, her eyes fixed on his, challenging him. She had done it. The unspoken thing was now spoken, in the most direct way possible. Nate let go of her arms as if they were hot coals. He backed away. 1 step, then 2, until his back hit a support beam. He felt the rough wood through his shirt. "I am leaving," he said. His voice was a rasp. "In 6 days. Nothing changes that." "I know," she said, her voice quiet. She did not move. "I just wanted to—" He stared at her. He had no words for what she was, what she had done. She was a woman who had lost everything and was still standing, fighting him for a few boards, and now, stealing a kiss in a half-broken barn. He felt a sudden, sharp anger. Not at her, at the situation, at the land, at himself. "Don't," he said. It was all he could manage. He turned, climbed down the ladder with clumsy, angry movements, and left the barn. He didn't look back. He untied his roan, swung into the saddle, and rode out, pushing the horse harder than he should have in the dark. He did not ride home. He rode up into the hills, into the wind, until the cold had scoured the feeling of her lips from his. The next 3 days were a torment of polite silence. He returned, as he had promised, to finish the job. They worked from sunup to sundown. They did not speak of the hayloft. They barely spoke at all. "That brace needs to be higher. The tin snips are by the trough. It's going to hold." They finished the roof. It was a solid, ugly patch, but it sealed the stalls from the weather. They reinforced the walls. They shoveled the last of the drifted snow and filth from the stalls. The air between them was so tight he felt he could cut it with his saw. Every time his hand brushed hers passing a tool, it was a jolt. He kept his eyes down. He focused on the wood, the nails, the straightness of his lines. Clara was the same. She worked with a grim focus, her face set. She was all business. She cooked a pot of beans for their midday meal, and they ate it standing up, on opposite sides of the barn. If she felt any shame, or any regret, she did not show it. She was a fortress. On the 4th day, the work was done. There was nothing left to fix. "It's done," he said, packing his tools. The sky was a low, bruised purple, the air heavy and still. A storm was coming, a bad one. "It is," she said. She stood by the stall door, her arms crossed. "I'm obliged to you, Mr. Burke. I'll bring by some canned tomatoes and jerky for your trip, as payment." "Don't need it," he said, strapping his hammer to his saddle. "Just see you bank that north wall. It'll drift bad when the wind comes." "I know how to bank a wall." He nodded, mounted his horse. He looked down at her. He wanted to say something. He wanted to ask her why. He wanted to tell her she was a fool to stay here. He said nothing. He just turned the roan and rode away, feeling the first bite of sleet on his neck. The storm hit that night. It was not a blizzard, but a raw, furious tantrum of wind and ice. The wind screamed down from the mountains, a solid wall of sound that rattled the windows of Nate's cabin. He sat by his cold stove, drinking whiskey, listening to his house groan. He thought of his own empty barn, solid and quiet. He thought of her patched-up roof. He thought of her, alone in that cabin, with just the sound of the wind for company. He told himself it was not his problem. He was leaving. He had 6 days, 5 days. He had lost count. He couldn't sleep. The wind was too loud. The whiskey just made him angry. He kept seeing her face in the moonlight, her eyes wide and defiant. He paced the floor. The wind was a living thing, trying to claw its way in. He pictured the new roof. He had set the braces himself. He had used 10-penny nails. It would hold. But what if the old section, the part they hadn't touched, gave way and brought his new work down with it? He cursed, grabbed his heavy coat, and went out. The sleet hit him like a shotgun blast. It was mixed with snow, a horizontal blast that stung his face and stole his breath. He pulled his hat low and bent into it, walking to his barn. He lit a lantern and checked his horse. The roan was fine, warm in its stall. He found himself walking. He wasn't sure why. He just moved, one foot in front of the other, bent against the gale. The lantern light a tiny, useless circle in the chaos. He walked the property line. He was a quarter mile from her place. He could see her lamp, a faint, fuzzy glow through the driving snow. He saw another light, moving, a lantern, near her barn. He ran, slipping on the ice-crusted ground. He thought of garrison. He thought of sabotage. He reached the barn, his hand on the butt of the pistol he always carried, and burst through the door. Clara was there, on a ladder, fighting with a sheet of canvas. She was trying to nail it over a section of the old wall where the wind had blasted a board clean off. She was soaked. Her hair was plastered to her head, and her hands were blue with cold. "What in God's name are you doing?" he roared over the wind. She startled, nearly falling. She looked down, her face a mask of fury. "I'm saving my barn. That board came loose. The wind is packing the stalls with snow. My cow's freezing." "Get down from there! You'll get yourself killed!" He grabbed the ladder. "Get down!" She descended, shaking with cold and anger. When she reached the floor, she threw the hammer. It hit the wall with a dull thud. "I had it!" she yelled. "You had nothing. You're freezing to death." He grabbed her arm. Her coat was a sheet of ice. "Go inside." "I won't. I have to fix it." "I'll fix it. Go!" He pushed her toward the cabin. She stumbled, then turned and ran, disappearing into the white. Nate took a breath. He was soaked. The wind inside the barn was almost as bad as it was outside. He found the board, fought it back into place, and began nailing. His fingers numb, the sleet finding its way down his collar. It took him an hour of cursing and fighting the wind, which tried to rip the wood from his hands. When it was done, it was a patch on a patch, but it was solid. He was gathering his tools when she returned. She was carrying a steaming tin pot, a mug, and a heavy wool blanket. "I brought you coffee," she said, her voice small against the storm. She'd changed into dry clothes. "And food." She set it down on a hay bale. He picked up the mug and drank. The coffee was scalding hot, laced with whiskey. It burned a trail straight to his stomach. He hadn't realized how cold he was. He was shaking. She handed him a piece of bread wrapped around a slab of cold bacon. He ate it in 3 bites, starving. She stood watching him. He was too tired to be angry, too cold to care about the silence. He wrapped the blanket around his shoulders. It smelled like her, like wood smoke and soap. "You're a fool. You know that," he said, his voice thick. He sat on the hay bale, the warmth of the coffee spreading through him. "I'm a survivor," she said. "You're a woman alone on a failing homestead, trying to patch a dying barn in a blizzard. That's not surviving. That's just a slow death." Her face hardened. And what are you? You're a man running away because he's afraid of a ghost. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stood up. You don't know anything about it. I know what they say. I know you lost your brother. I know you've been hiding in that house of yours for 2 years, and now you're running. You're giving up. You're a coward. You call me a coward? He took a step toward her. The lantern light threw their shadows, huge and distorted, against the wall. I'm the one who's sane. I'm the one who sees this place for what it is. It's a grave. It buried your husband. It buried your son. It buried my brother. And you're standing here, trying to pretty it up with a hammer and nails. You're wasting your strength trying to fix things that are already dead. The tension in the barn was so thick he could taste it. The storm howled outside, a symphony of their anger. Clara's eyes blazed. She was shaking, but not from the cold. She walked right up to him until her chest was almost touching his. You think I'm dead? She whispered, her voice vibrating with rage. She grabbed his frozen, numb hand. She didn't put it on her cheek or her arm. She pulled his hand under her coat, past the rough wool of her sweater, and pressed his palm flat against the thin cotton of her shift, right over her heart. It was beating, a frantic, hot, powerful beat beneath his cold hand. It felt like a trapped bird. You feel that? She said, her voice breaking. That is not dead. I am not dead. The thunder cracked, a sound so loud it shook the barn, vibrating through the soles of his boots. He looked down at his hand, at the impossible, living warmth of her. He looked at her face, inches from his. Her lips were parted. She was crying, silent tears of rage streaming down her face. He didn't know who moved first. He was lost. His plan to leave, his guilt, his anger, it all dissolved in the face of the simple, staggering fact of her heartbeat. He kissed her, or she kissed him. It didn't matter. It was a collision. His other hand came up, burying itself in her damp hair, pulling her head back. It was not a kiss of comfort. It was long, and it was aching. It was all the loneliness of the last 2 years. It was all his grief, and all her fury. It turned harder. His mouth was rough on hers. He pushed her back against the stall, his body pressing her into the wood. This was not about love. It was about life. It was a desperate, angry affirmation that they were still breathing when so many were not. He felt her fingers dig into his back, her nails scraping through his wet shirt. She was kissing him back with the same desperate, starving energy. He pulled her up, his arm around her waist, and half dragged, half carried her to the ladder. He climbed, pulling her with him, into the dark, sweet-smelling hay of the loft. The wind shrieked above them, but in the hay it was muffled, a distant roar. They fell into the deep pile, a tangle of limbs, the wool blanket forgotten downstairs. They tore at each other's cold, wet clothes, their hands clumsy, frantic. They were both desperate to feel alive again, to find a heat that could fight back the cold, the death, the leaving. It was a raw, wordless, and violent coming together, a confirmation of life against the storm. The next morning, the world was silent, buried under a foot of fresh, heavy snow. The sun was a pale, watery disk. Nate woke first. He was in the hayloft, buried in hay, an old quilt he didn't remember finding thrown over them. Clara was asleep, her back to him. He was sore. His hand, which she had pressed to her heart, was aching. He felt a wave of self-loathing so strong it made him sick. What had he done? This wasn't leaving. This was the opposite of leaving. This was a complication he could not afford. He dressed quietly in the cold air. His clothes were stiff and still damp. He looked at her, one arm thrown over her head, her face turned away. She looked small. He climbed down the ladder. He checked the barn. His patch had held. The animals were safe. He left without a word, pushing his way through the heavy snow back to his own ranch. He arrived at her place later that day. He had to. The silence was worse than the argument. He found her splitting firewood, her face set, her movements precise. "Clara," he said. She didn't stop. The axe fell, splitting a log. "Morning, Mr. Burke. Snow's heavy." He felt a flash of anger. "That's all you have to say?" She stopped, resting the axe head on the block. She looked at him, her face calm, her eyes clear. "I have chores to do. That storm set me back." "Clara, about last night." "Last night was a storm," she said, cutting him off. "People do stupid things in a storm. It's over." She picked up the split wood and began stacking it. She acted as if nothing had happened. He was stunned. He had expected tears or accusations. He had not expected this dismissal, this cold, practical wall, and it made him angry. He was angry at her for being so calm, and he was angry at himself, because for one, stupid. Burning second, he realized he had wanted it to matter. He wanted more. "Right," he said, his voice tight. "Just a storm." He turned and left. He spent the next 2 days at his own ranch, a prisoner of his own making. He had 4 days left. He had to get out. He began the grim task of emptying his house. He was a man possessed, sorting through the ghosts. He built a bonfire in the snow behind the bunkhouse. He dragged out his mother's old rocker. Its seat split. He threw it on the fire. He threw out his father's ledgers, the books full of numbers that added up to nothing. He threw out old clothes, broken harnesses, a lifetime of useless, broken things. He was burning his past. He went into Jed's room. He hadn't been in here in a year. The bed was still stripped. A pair of worn boots sat by the door. On the dresser was a small wooden box. Nate opened it. Inside, there was a hawk's feather, a dried wildflower, and Jed's first skinning knife. It was a simple knife, with a handle of antler horn he had carved himself. Nate had given it to him on his 16th birthday. He picked it up. The handle was smooth in his palm. He saw Jed smile, bright and reckless. He heard his laugh. He felt the sickening, hollow weight of his brother's body as he lifted him onto the roan. Nate sank to the floor, the knife clutched in his hand. He put his head against the dusty bed frame, and for the first time in 2 years, he broke. He wept, not quiet tears, but harsh, ragged sobs that tore at his throat. He wept for his brother, for his own failure, and for the impossible, confusing heat of the woman in the hayloft. 2 days later, Clara was scrubbing her cabin floor when a horse rode up. It wasn't Nate, it was Sheriff Harlan. Harlan was a big man, with a weary face and a thick mustache. He was a fair man, but he was also a politician. He took off his hat as she opened the door. "Mrs. Dunning." "Sheriff, come in out of the cold." "No, thank you. Ma'am, this isn't a social call." He shifted his weight, looking at her new barn roof. I'm just paying a call on the homesteaders in the valley. Just a friendly warning." "A warning about what?" Harlan sighed, looking off toward the hills. "You know Frank Garrison is buying the Burke place." "I heard." "Well, Garrison doesn't just want the Burke place. He wants this whole valley. He's got plans for a big herd, and he doesn't like smallholders. He's already paid off the Swensons and the Millers to sell. They're moving out come spring." Clara felt a cold knot in her stomach. The Swensons and the Millers were her only other neighbors. "He's trying to force you out, Clara," Harlan said, his voice low. "He wants this land. He wants your water rights." "I'm not selling. He's not a patient man, and he's a powerful one. Just be careful. Don't give him any reason." "A reason for what?" "A reason to have the law on his side. Just be careful." He nodded, put his hat back on, and rode away. Clara stood in the doorway until he was gone, her hands clenched. She was alone, truly alone. The Millers and the Swensons were leaving. Garrison was boxing her in. She thought of Nate. She thought of that night in the barn. She had let him in. She had let herself feel. For one night, and this was the price. The world was coming to tear her down. She could not afford to need someone. She couldn't. She was feeding her horses that evening when he returned. He rode up quiet. She didn't turn around. She just kept throwing hay into the trough. "Clara!" His voice was different. The anger was gone. It was just tired. "The horses are fine," she said, her back to him. "The roof held. You did a good job. You can go now." I found this," he said. He was standing behind her. "In my brother's things." She turned. He was holding out his hand. In his palm was a small, carved wooden bird. "Jed made it," he said. He was sweet on your boy. Thomas, he was carving this for him, for his birthday. He never got to give it to him." Clara looked at the bird. It was rough, unfinished, but it was beautiful. She saw her son's small, serious face. She felt her knees go weak. "I can't," she whispered, her throat closing. "Nate, please, don't. I thought you should have it." He stepped closer. He didn't try to kiss her. He just gently touched her arm, his fingers resting on her coat sleeve. She looked at his hand. This time, his touch was soft. It was hesitant. It was afraid. And she let him. She didn't pull away. She stood there, looking at the small bird, and let him touch her. A quiet, simple, and terrifying connection. She was so afraid. Nate went to town the next day. His week was almost up. He had to see about the papers, about delaying. He didn't know what he was doing. He just knew he couldn't sign. Not yet. He was in Henderson's Mercantile, buying coffee, when Garrison came in. Frank Garrison was a big man, in a new, expensive coat, his face red from the cold. He was laughing with two other ranchers. "It's as good as done," Garrison boomed, slapping the counter. "I'll have the Burke place by Monday, and once I have his water rights, I'll control the whole valley." "What about the widow?" one of the men asked. Garrison smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "She'll be gone by spring. I'm raising the price of feed at the co-op. I'm buying her banknote. She'll be starved out before the thaw. She'll be begging me to take that little patch of dirt off her hands." Nate stood by the pickle barrel, his blood running cold. Garrison hadn't seen him. He was bleeding her out, slowly, legally. Nate left the store, the coffee forgotten. He walked to the land office, his mind a storm of conflict. He was supposed to sign. He was supposed to be free, but his escape was her ruin. His freedom was her cage. He stood in the street, the cold wind whipping his coat. He thought of Jed's knife. He thought of Clara's heart, beating hot against his hand. He had run from one ghost, only to find himself chained to a living, breathing woman. Selling his land wasn't just leaving. It was a betrayal. It was helping the man who had, all those years ago, funded the range war that got his brother killed. It was handing Clara over to him. He was trapped. He was well and truly trapped. Nate walked out of Henderson's Mercantile, leaving the coffee on the counter. His mind was a frozen, clear block of rage. Garrison's voice echoed in his ears. "Starved out before the thaw, begging me to take it." He was using Nate's departure to destroy Clara. He was using Jed's legacy to do it. He didn't go to the land office. He went to the saloon. It was just past noon, and the room was half full, smelling of stale beer and fried bacon. Frank Garrison was at a back table, holding court with two men Nate didn't recognize, a map spread between them. Nate walked straight to the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't draw his gun. He just stood there until Garrison looked up, his smile fading. "Burke," Garrison said, his eyes narrowing. "Come to celebrate our deal. Drinks are on me." "The deal is on hold," Nate said. The saloon went quiet. Garrison's smile vanished. He leaned back in his chair. A big man. A dangerous man. "On hold. We sign Monday. The papers are drawn." "I'm reevaluating," Nate said, his voice flat and cold. "The price isn't right. and I don't like who you're sharing drinks with." One of the men started to stand. Garrison put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Reevaluating," Garrison said, testing the word. "You're a fool. Burke, that land is picked clean. It's dead. I'm offering you a clean break, a chance to get out from under your brother's ghost." The mention of Jed was like a spur. Nate's hand twitched. "The land is mine, and I'm not signing. Not Monday. Not until I'm satisfied." "Satisfied with what?" "With you," Nate said. Garrison stared at him for a long, silent moment. The man was calculating. He saw the new resolve in Nate, and it annoyed him. He relaxed, his smile returning, but it was thin and sharp. "Suit yourself," Garrison said, turning back to his map. "It's a free territory, but you're making a mistake. This valley, it's a hard place. It chews up people who try to stand alone." He looked up, his eyes like chips of ice. "It's a long winter. Burke, awfully hard for a man, even harder for a smallholder, especially one who's all alone. You think about that." It was a threat, clean and precise. It hung in the air. Nate didn't move. He just looked at Garrison, letting the man feel the full weight of his hatred. Then he turned, his boots loud on the boards, and walked out. He rode straight to Clara's homestead. He found her mending a section of fence near the creek, her hands wrapped in cloth against the cold, barbed wire. He dismounted, his movement stiff. "I was in town," he said, standing on the other side of the wire. "You're back early," she said, not looking up. She was twisting a stay. "I saw Garrison. I heard him talking in the mercantile. He's planning to ruin you. He's buying your banknote. He's raising the feed prices to starve you out." She stopped, her hands, holding the wire, went still. "So I went to the saloon," Nate continued, his voice tight. "I told him the sale is off. I'm not signing." She turned, her face pale, but her eyes were not grateful. They were blazing. "You what?" "I'm not selling to him. I'm not letting him use my land to—" "Who asked you?" She cut in, her voice low and furious. She dropped the wire. "Who in God's name asked you to interfere in my business? Nate Burke?" He was stunned. "Interfere? Clara? He's going to destroy you. This is my fight," she said, stepping toward him. "It's my land, my note, and my problem. I didn't ask you to ride in like some white knight. I don't need a savior." "This isn't a fight," Nate shot back, his own anger rising. "It's a slaughter. He's got you boxed in. He has the bank. He has the co-op. You can't win." "And what makes you think you can? You think because you're a man, you can just walk in and he'll back down? All you've done is paint a target on my back. And yours. I had a plan." "What plan? To starve? To freeze?" "To survive," she yelled. "The same way I've been surviving. I don't need you. I don't need saving. I've been saved before. I just need you to stay out of my way." Her words, the venom in the word saved, hit him like a slap. This wasn't about pride. This was something else. His anger broke, replaced by a raw, desperate honesty. "You think this is about saving you?" he yelled, taking a step toward the fence, his hands clenching. "You think I'm doing this for you? I don't care if your damn barn falls in again. I don't care about your fences." He was lying, but the words were hot and angry. He took a breath, the cold air burning his lungs. The truth came out, quieter, but more jagged. Garrison, he's the one. He backed those railroad graders that started the range war. He paid for the bullets that killed Jed. Clara's face went slack. "I didn't know it, not for sure, until today." Nate went on, his voice thick. "But I saw him with one of the same men. And he's using my land, Jed's land, to crush you, to finish what he started. This isn't about saving you. Clara, I won't let him. I'm not trying to save you. I don't want to lose you." He hadn't known he was going to say it. The words hung in the frozen air between them. I don't want to lose you. Clara stared at him. Her anger, her fierce pride, all of it just crumbled. She looked away, her chin trembling. She wrapped her arms around herself. Saved, she whispered, and the word was full of poison. You don't know what that word means. She leaned against the fence post, her head bowed. My husband, Arthur, he saved me. That's what the town said. I was an orphan girl working at the mercantile. No family, no prospects. And he was a good man. Quiet, pious. He offered me a home. He saved me. Nate stood, frozen, just watching her, a terrible dread rising in him. He was a good man, she said, her voice hollow. In town, at church, everyone said so. But in this cabin, when he was drunk, or when the crops failed, or when his pride was hurt, he'd lock the door to teach me my place. Nate felt his blood run cold. He never hit my face, Clara said, her voice a dead monotone, staring at the snow. He was too smart for that. A man takes care of his property, he'd say. He used his belt or just his fists. On my back, my ribs, where the clothes would hide it. Nate couldn't breathe. He saw her, this small, strong woman. And he imagined, Clara, he whispered, but he couldn't form the words. The town, she went on, her voice breaking. They knew. Oh, they knew. Mrs. Davies, the preacher. They saw the bruises on my arms one summer when I was hanging laundry. They heard him. Sometimes. He wasn't always quiet about it. She looked at Nate, her eyes swimming in tears she refused to let fall. They didn't do anything. They'd just pray for me. They'd tell me to be a more obedient wife, because he was a good man. You see, a solid man. And I was his property. He had saved me, so he had the right. She was shaking, her whole body trembling with the memory, with the shame. Nate was stunned. He saw the town in a new, sick light. He saw her fight for the barn, her fury at his help. All of it. It wasn't pride. It was terror. Clara, he said, his voice thick. God, I didn't know. He reached through the fence, his hand clumsy. He touched her shoulder. She flinched. A violent, automatic reaction. I'm sorry, he said, his heart breaking. I'm so sorry, Clara. He fumbled with the wire gate, opened it, and stepped through. He stood in front of her. She wouldn't look at him. She was braced, waiting for a blow, or for him to walk away. He didn't do either. He reached out, slow, and pulled her against his chest. She was stiff, resistant for a second, like a wild thing, and then she just broke. She buried her face in his cold coat and held on, her small body racked with silent sobs. He held her, his arms tight around her, his chin resting on the top of her head. He just held her, in the cold, by the broken fence, and rocked her, his own eyes burning. They stayed that way for a long time. The sun began to dip, turning the snow a pale, bruised blue. He finally led her back to the barn, his arm around her. They checked the animals, the familiar, simple chores grounding them. The barn was quiet, safe. He climbed the ladder to the loft. It was their place. The air was sweet with hay. He sat, his back against a beam. After a moment, she followed. She sat near him, but not touching, pulling her knees to her chest. He's gone, Clara, Nate said softly to the shadows. He can't hurt you anymore. She was quiet for a moment. He's not. He's in their eyes. Every time Mrs. Davies looks at me, every time the preacher talks about a wife's duty, he's here. She touched her side, through the thick wool of her coat. Nate's chest ached. He moved, shifting to sit in front of her. He took her chapped hands, his touch awkward, his fingers rough against hers. He is not here, he said, his voice firm. I am. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not the desperate, angry kiss of the storm. It was slow. It was gentle. It was a question. She didn't pull away. She let him. Her lips were soft, hesitant. He pulled back, looked at her in the dim light. He saw the fear in her eyes, but she was still there. She hadn't run. With a slow, deliberate movement, Clara's hands went to the buttons of her dress. She didn't do it with passion. She did it with a grim, painful honesty. She unbuttoned the high collar, her fingers fumbling. She turned her back to him. "The light is bad," she said, her voice a whisper. "It's fine," he said. She pulled the dress and the shift beneath it off her shoulders, bearing her back to the cold air. Nate's breath caught. In the pale moonlight filtering through the cracks, he saw them, faint, white lines, old, healed scars that crisscrossed her skin, the legacy of Arthur Dunning. He reached out a trembling hand, tracing one scar over her shoulder blade. She shivered, a sharp, full-body tremor, but she didn't move. She was trusting him. He leaned forward. He pressed his lips, warm and gentle, to the scarred skin. He kissed one, then another. He wasn't claiming her. He was honoring, atoning. He kissed the pain she had carried alone for so long. She made a small, broken sound in her throat. She turned, her face wet with tears. She pulled him down into the hay, her arms circling his neck. They made love again. It was not the wild, desperate coupling of the storm. It was slow, and it was full of pain. It was a search for healing, a quiet, wordless promise in the dark. The next morning, Nate didn't ride back to his own ranch. When the sun came up, he walked out of Clara's cabin, got his tools from his saddle, and walked over to her porch. The top step was broken, tilted at a dangerous angle. He began to work. He didn't ask her. He didn't tell her his plan. He just found a solid plank in the wood he'd salvaged from the barn, and he began to rebuild her steps. He worked all day. He was a good carpenter, methodical and quiet. He tore out the rotten wood, leveled the supports, and built 2 new, solid steps. Clara watched him from the window. She brought him coffee at mid-morning and a bowl of stew at midday. She didn't say thank you. He didn't ask for it. She just watched him. She watched his hands, strong and sure, as they measured, sawed, and hammered. The same hands that had held her, the same hands that had been so gentle. She began to look at him differently. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a threat. He was just a man who was staying. When he finished the steps, he fixed the loose shutter on her window. He rehung her cabin door so it didn't stick. He was quietly, patiently, rebuilding the broken parts of her house. 2 days later, the retaliation came. It wasn't public. Nate was splitting wood for her when he heard a cry from the creek. He grabbed the axe and ran. Clara was standing by the bank, staring into the water. The creek, her only source of water for her stock and herself, was running thick and brown, and it was full of filth. Someone had gone upstream, dammed the narrow channel with rocks and deadfall, and thrown in the rotting carcass of a deer. Nate's rage was pure, white-hot, and silent. This was Garrison's answer. "Go inside, Clara," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Boil what water you have." "Nate, my stock." "Go inside! Lock the door!" She saw the look on his face, the look of the man who had lost his brother, and she didn't argue. He didn't go upstream. Not yet. He knew they'd be back. Men like this, they wanted to see their work. He went to the barn. He didn't take his gun. He waited. He sat in the cold shadows of the barn, just inside the door, and he waited. They came just after twilight. 2 riders, silhouetted against the snow. They were laughing, riding down to the creek to admire the mess. Nate stepped out of the barn. "Get off the horses!" The men startled, reaching for their guns. "I wouldn't," Nate said. He was holding the heavy logging axe. The men looked at each other, then at Nate. He was one man, but he was standing there like a boulder, and his eyes were not sane. They dismounted, slow. Nate recognized one of them, a hired hand named Calloway, who worked for Garrison. "You're fouling the water," Nate said. "Just clearing some deadfall." "Burke," Calloway sneered, but his eyes were nervous. Nate moved. He was faster than they expected. He swung the axe, not the blade, but the flat of the head, and hit Calloway's partner in the gut. The man folded with a grunt. Calloway grabbed his pistol, but Nate was on him, grabbing his wrist and twisting. The gun went off, the shot muffled in the snow, and Nate slammed his fist into Calloway's face. He dragged the man, dazed and bleeding, into the barn. He threw him against the wall. He lit the small forge Clara used for mending tack. "What are you doing?" Calloway stammered, his eyes wide with terror. Nate didn't answer. He took Clara's branding iron, a simple D, and thrust it into the coals. "You like your work?" Nate asked, his voice a low rumble. As he pumped the bellows, the coals glowed. "You like ruining things. A woman's water, her home." "Garrison sent us," Calloway whimpered, holding his broken nose. "He just said to discourage her." "Discourage," Nate repeated. The iron was beginning to glow red. He pulled it out. The heat came off it in waves. "Nate, don't!" Calloway begged, trying to scramble away. "Please!" Nate advanced on him, holding the glowing iron. He pressed the hot end against the wood post, an inch from Calloway's face. The wood hissed and smoked, the D burning black. Calloway screamed. "You tell Garrison," Nate whispered, his face inches from the terrified man's. "You tell him what you saw. You tell him I'm not leaving. You tell him if he, or you, or any of his men ever set foot on this land again, I will not mark the wood." He pulled the iron back. "Get your friend. Get out!" Calloway scrambled to his feet, grabbed his partner, and fled, half carrying him to their horses. They rode off, frantic, and did not look back. Nate stood in the barn, breathing hard. The smell of burnt wood thick in the air. He dropped the iron. It sizzled in a snowdrift. He came back to the cabin, his knuckles raw and bloody. Clara was waiting, her face pale. She just looked at his hands, then at his face. "They won't be back," he said, and she knew it was the truth. Garrison's next attack was more subtle. It came from the pulpit. The following Sunday, Clara needed supplies. Nate took her. They rode into town together. The street went silent. Every eye was on them. Nate Burke, the killer's brother, the recluse, and the widow Dunning, together. Preacher Davies was on the boardwalk, his wife beside him. He nodded curtly at Nate, his eyes full of judgment as they lingered on Clara. Inside the mercantile, Mrs. Davies was talking to two other women, her voice a piercing whisper. Living in sin, no respect for her husband's memory, or her son's. Some women just bring ruin. Clara, who had faced a bull, a storm, and Garrison's thugs, froze. This she could not fight. This was Arthur's ghost, in a calico dress. She grabbed her flour and salt, paid Henderson, and walked out, her face burning with humiliation. She retreated. For 3 days. She would not leave the cabin. She scrubbed floors that were already clean. She baked bread she didn't eat. She was trapped, the town's judgment a prison. Nate found her sitting by the cold stove, just staring. "Clara," he said gently, "this is because of me." "It's because of them," she whispered, their small, black hearts. "We can stop it," he said. He knelt in front of her. We'll do it proper. I'll court you, publicly." He took a breath. "We can get married. Clara, right away. That will shut them up. It will give you protection." She looked at him, and her eyes, which had been dead, flashed with the old fire. She stood up. "Married?" she said, her voice sharp. Courted? You mean be owned? Is that it? Nate? Trade Arthur's name for yours, so I can be respectable again, so you can protect me. No, he said, standing. That's not what I mean. I just want to— I told you, she said, her voice trembling with a new, fierce strength. I don't need protecting. I don't need saving. And I will not be owned again. Not by Arthur, not by the town, and not by you. The words hung between them, a painful, uncrossable line. They had to go back to town. They were out of kerosene and coffee. The ride was silent. The tension between them a cold, third passenger. They pulled up to the Mercantile. It was Saturday. The street was busy. Preacher Davies and his wife were on the porch again, like a pair of crows. Nate dismounted, his face grim, his hand resting near his pistol. He was ready for a fight. A word. Anything. He turned to help Clara down. She swung down from her horse, ignoring his hand. She looked at him, his face set and angry. Then she looked past him, at Mrs. Davies, who was already whispering, her face pinched. Clara stood there for a second, caught between Nate's angry protection and the town's cold judgment. Nate, she said. He turned, his eyes still on the preacher. What? She grabbed the front of his coat with both hands, pulled his face down to hers, and kissed him. It was not a hidden kiss. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of pure, undiluted defiance. She kissed him long and deep and hard, in the middle of the main street, with the entire town watching. There was a collective, shocked gasp from the porch. Mrs. Davies looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Clara broke the kiss. She looked Nate straight in the eyes, her own blazing. Then, without a word, she turned her back on the preacher, her head held high, and walked straight past the stunned townsfolk and into the Mercantile. Nate was left standing by his horse, the world knocked clean off its axis. He touched his lips. He looked at the sputtering preacher, and a slow, wide grin spread across his face. It was the first time he had smiled in 2 years. He followed her in. That kiss on the main street of Laramie Fork broke the world. It was a single, defiant shot fired in a war that, until now, Clara had been fighting alone. As they rode out of town, the silence between them was different. It was not the angry, brittle silence of before. It was the stunned, humming quiet after a lightning strike. The entire town had seen. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Davies, had looked as if she'd been forced to swallow a wasp. Nate rode beside her, his face grim, but the set of his jaw had changed. He was no longer a man drifting toward an exit. He was a man who had just chosen a side, publicly and irrevocably. He had just declared himself an enemy of Frank Garrison and an ally of the town's shunned widow. Clara felt a terrifying, unfamiliar lightness. She had taken back her own story. She had not been kissed, she had kissed. The choice had been hers. But as the town disappeared behind the rise, the weight of that choice settled on her. She had tied this man to her, this broken, angry man. And she knew what the valley did to men who stood against Garrison. They reached her homestead. Nate dismounted and saw to her horse first. A new, quiet ritual. He moved with a purpose she hadn't seen before. The restless, haunted energy was still there, but it was now banked, like coals waiting for a wind. "I'll be at my place," he said, not looking at her. "I have things to sort." She just nodded. "Nate, what you did in town with Garrison." "It's not done," he said. He mounted his roan. "Bolt your door tonight." He rode off, leaving her alone with the vast, quiet snow and the echo of her own heartbeat. Nate did not go to his cabin. He went to his barn. The cold inside was biting, the air thick with the smell of old leather and dust. He walked to the back wall, to the peg where his brother's saddle still hung. It was a simple, worn stock saddle. The leather cracked. He ran his hand over the seat. 2 years, 24 months, 730 days, and he was standing right back where he started. He closed his eyes, and the memory he had spent 2 years drinking and working to bury rose up and took him whole. It had been a fence dispute, just a line of wire. Garrison, new to the valley, was backed by railroad money and wanted the open range. He had been buying up land and grazing rights, and his men had started cutting the fences of the smallholders. Nate and Jed included. "It's our land, Nate," Jed had said, his voice hot, his eyes bright with the justice of being 19. "We can't let them just run over us." Jed, who was all fire and optimism, who still believed in the right and wrong of things. "It's just wire, Jed," Nate had argued, the familiar caution of the older brother settling on him. "It's not worth a fight. We can restring it." "And let them do it again and again? No. We ride out. We meet them. We tell them this is Burke land. Father would have—" That had been the spur. Father would have— Nate, who had felt the weight of his father's legacy since the man had coughed his lungs out, couldn't argue. He was tired, and he was grieving, but he was still the head of the rocking bee. "All right," Nate had said, the word heavy. "We'll ride out, but we just talk. Jed, no guns. We just talk." They had ridden out at dawn, the air crisp. Nate had insisted they check the high pasture line first, the one bordering Garrison's new property. It was his decision, his mistake. They found the fence. It wasn't just cut. It was torn down. Posts were pulled from the ground. It was an act of pure, arrogant destruction. "The cowards," Jed had hissed, swinging down from his horse. "Jed, wait!" Nate had felt it then, a sudden, cold prickle on his neck. The air was too still. The magpies were silent. He saw the glint of the sun on a rifle barrel, high in the rocks above them, just as the first shot cracked through the morning. "Ambush!" Nate roared, pulling his own rifle from its scabbard. But he was too late. It wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter. There were at least 5 of them, hidden, secure. Bullets whined off the rocks, kicking up dust. Jed's horse screamed and fell. Jed himself was pinned behind it, firing his pistol at shadows. "Nate, I'm pinned!" "Stay down, I'm coming!" Nate was firing, laying down cover, his heart hammering. But he was exposed. He felt a white-hot poker slam into his shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. He hit the ground hard, his rifle flying from his grasp. "Nate!" Jed screamed. He saw his brother was hit, and he did what he always did. He stopped thinking. He stood up, breaking cover, and ran toward Nate. "Jed, no! Get back!" Nate bellowed, trying to get to his feet, but his arm was useless. A second shot, flat and final, echoed. Jed stopped. He looked down at his own chest, a look of profound, confused surprise on his face. A dark, wet stain was spreading, impossibly fast, across his shirt. He looked at Nate, his lips parted. He didn't make a sound. He just fell. The shooting stopped. The ambush was over. The men in the rocks had done their job. They mounted and rode off, their laughter a faint, cruel echo. Nate, his shoulder on fire, crawled to his brother. He dragged himself through the dirt, his vision graying at the edges. "Jed! Jeddy!" His brother was on his back, his eyes open, staring at the vast, empty blue of the Wyoming sky. The front of his shirt was soaked. I can't feel my legs, Nate," Jed whispered, his voice thin, like a child's. "You're all right," Nate lied, his voice thick, his hands fumbling, trying to find the wound, to stop the bleeding. But there was too much. "You're fine. We're going home." "It's cold," Jed whispered. His eyes found Nate's. "I'm sorry, Nate. I shouldn't have—" "No, don't talk," Nate said, tears streaming. cutting paths through the dust and blood on his face.
"This was me! I brought you! I should have stopped it!"
He was the older brother. He was supposed to protect him. He was supposed to be the smart one, the responsible one. Jed's eyes lost their focus. He let out a small, soft breath, and he was gone. Nate had sat there, howling his brother's name at the empty sky, until his throat was raw. He had sat there for an hour, holding Jed's cooling hand, before he'd found the strength to get to his feet, his shoulders screaming, and lift his brother's limp, light body onto his own horse for the long, silent ride back. He had never forgiven himself. He never would. He opened his eyes in the barn. His hand was clenched so tight on the saddle horn that his knuckles were white. The guilt was as fresh and raw as it had been that day, and he knew, with a terrible, cold certainty, that the men Garrison had sent to burn Clara's fence, the men he was fighting now, were the same kind of men. They might even be the same men. While Nate wrestled with his ghosts, Clara faced hers. The next morning, she bundled up and walked, not to the barn, but to the small rise behind her cabin. The wind had blown the snow clear from a patch of ground where a small, rough wooden cross stood. She knelt, her knees sinking into the crusty snow. She ran her mittened hand over the name carved into the wood. Thomas.
"Hello, my sweet boy,"
she whispered, her breath plumed.
It's been a while. I'm sorry."
She sat back on her heels, looking at the small grave. Her son, taken by a fever that had burned through him in 3 days, leaving her with a cold, silent house and a grief so vast it had no edges.
"I'm in trouble. Tommy," she said to the cross, "I'm in such trouble. I met a man. His name is Nate. He's a good man. I think he's broken, like me, but he's staying."
She pulled off her mitten, her bare hand stinging in the cold, and touched the wood.
"I'm so scared,"
she confessed, the words tearing out of her.
"I'm so terrified. You know what your father was? He said he loved me, and he hurt me. He turned on me, and then I had you, and I loved you so much. My heart hurt, and you died. You left me."
A tear froze on her cheek. "It feels like a curse. Every man I've ever touched, ever cared for, they either die or they turn on me. They leave or they hurt. I don't know which is worse." She looked back toward the cabin, where Nate's repairs, the new steps, the tight door, stood as solid proof of his presence. And now, this man, Nate, I kissed him, Tommy, in front of the whole town, and I think I'm starting to, I don't know, I feel safe with him. And that's what scares me most of all. I'm afraid to love him, because if I do, he'll die. Garrison will kill him, or he'll turn on me. He'll become Arthur. I don't think I can survive that again. I don't." She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking.
"I don't know what to do."
Nate found her an hour later, still kneeling, a small, dark shape against the snow. He walked up quietly. He'd been looking for her.
"Clara?"
She stood up quickly, wiping her face, her back to him.
"I was just—"
"I know," he said. He stood a few feet away, his hat in his hands, his own grief for his brother still raw on his face. They stood in silence, 2 people at 2 graves. "I'm not selling," Nate said, his voice flat. "Not now, not to Garrison. I'm not leaving." She turned, her face guarded. "What does that mean, Nate?" "It means I'm staying, and I'm fighting him, but I can't do it from my ranch, and you can't do it from yours. He'll pick us apart. We have to combine." "Combine? I want to offer you half my land," he said, the words coming out clumsy, rehearsed. "Half of the Rocking Bee. We can run our stock together. We can work it as partners. He can't fight both of us. Not if we're one. One operation. He thought it was a good offer, a practical offer, an offer of partnership. He was wrong. Clara's face, which had been soft with grief, snapped hard. Her eyes went from sad to furious in a heartbeat. He saw the slap coming, but he didn't, or couldn't, move to stop it. Her hand cracked across his face, a sharp, stinging blow that echoed in the frozen air. He stared at her, stunned.
You,
she said, her voice a low, shaking hiss. You think that's what this is? After everything, you think you can just offer me land? You think you can buy me? No, Nate stammered. Clara, I'm not Arthur.
Aren't you?
She cried, her control shattering. Offering me half your land, offering to protect me. It's just another kind of fence. Nate, another kind of ownership. I told you I will not be owned. She was terrified. He saw it now. His practical offer had sounded, to her, like a cage, like Arthur's salvation. He said, his hand on his stinging cheek. I don't know how else to be with you. I don't know what to do. He looked so lost. He wasn't a savior. He wasn't a threat. He was just a man, as broken as she was, holding out the only thing he had to offer. Her anger broke, just as it had at the fence line. It shattered, and the tears came, hot and fast. She cried for her son, and for her husband, and for this impossible, damaged man in front of her. She stepped forward, grabbed the front of his coat, and pulled him to her. She kissed him, her lips desperate, her tears cold on his face. She kissed him deeply, a kiss of shared, awful understanding. There in the cold field, with the snow beginning to fall again, dusting their hair like ash. It was Garrison who made the next move. The kiss in town, and Nate's refusal to sell, had been a public humiliation. The threats from the branding iron had been a private one. Garrison was done with subtlety. It happened 3 nights later. Clara woke to a smell that every homesteader fears more than anything. Smoke. She burst from the cabin. The night was lit with an evil, flickering orange. It wasn't her barn. It was her fence line. The long, dry grass stretch of her southern pasture was ablaze, a wall of fire moving fast toward her barn. Garrison's men had set it.
Nate!
She screamed, though his ranch was too far away for him to hear. She grabbed buckets, a wet blanket, but it was useless. The fire was too big, too fast. Nate saw the glow from his porch. He didn't wait. He didn't even saddle. He vaulted onto his roan's bare back, grabbed its mane, and dug his heels in, riding like a madman across the frozen ground. He arrived to find Clara beating at the flames with a blanket, a tiny, futile figure against a wall of fire. He jumped from his horse and grabbed her, pulling her back. "It's moving to the barn!" she screamed, fighting him. "Get the animals!" he roared. "Get them out! Now!" As she ran to the barn, he saw them. 2 riders, silhouetted against the flames on the ridge, watching their work. One of them laughed. Nate heard it, a faint, high sound on the wind. A black, silent rage. The same rage he'd felt when Jed died. Took him. He didn't think, he didn't plan. He vaulted back onto his horse and rode, not toward the fire, but straight at the men on the ridge. They saw him coming, a dark shape at a dead gallop. They spurred their horses, turning to flee, but Nate was a better rider, and his rage made him faster. He caught the last man, launching himself from his own horse onto the back of the other, tackling the man from his saddle. They hit the ground, a tangle of limbs. Nate was on his feet first. He grabbed the man, it was Calloway, the same man from the creek, and slammed his fist into his face. The man scrambled, trying to get away. Nate tackled him, his hands finding the man's throat. He was blind. He was deaf. He was back in the rocks. Jed was dying. And this was the man who had done it. He hit him. He hit him again and again, the sound a wet, sick thud of bone on bone. He was trying to kill him. He was trying to beat the man's face into the frozen dirt. He didn't hear the other rider flee. He didn't hear Clara screaming his name. "Nate! Nate! Stop! You're killing him!" He felt her hands, small and frantic, pulling at his shoulders. He threw her off, a backhanded shove that sent her sprawling in the snow. He turned back to the man, his fist raised for another blow. Clara screamed, "Nate, please!" That one word, her voice, cut through the red haze. "Please." He stopped. His fist was trembling. An inch from the man's ruined face. He looked down. Calloway was unconscious, a bloody, broken mess beneath him. Nate's hands were covered in blood. He looked at his hands. He looked at Clara, who was pushing herself up, her face a mask of pure terror. She wasn't looking at the fire. She was looking at him. The rage drained, leaving him sick and shaking. He had almost done it. He had almost killed a man with his bare hands. And he had shoved her. He had hurt her. He stumbled to his feet, backing away from the body, his hands held up as if they were poison. He looked at Clara. I... She just stared at him, her eyes wide. She saw the violence. She saw the man who had kissed her scars, the man who had held her. And she saw this, a man who was not just wounded. He was dangerous. He was the thing she had feared all along. He turned and ran, stumbling, to his horse. He rode, not home, but away, into the darkness. He didn't come back for 2 days. Clara, with the help of the few neighbors who came to the glow, put out the fire. It had claimed her pasture, but she and Nate had stopped it before it reached the barn. Calloway's partner had come back, dragged the unconscious man onto his horse, and disappeared. Clara found Nate on the 3rd day. He was in the hayloft. Their hayloft. He was sitting in the corner, his head in his hands, his knuckles scabbed and broken. He looked like he hadn't slept. She stood on the ladder, watching him. She was still afraid, but she had come. "Nate," she said softly. He didn't look up. "You saw," he whispered. "You saw it." "Yes." That's who I am. Clara, that's what this place made me. It's what I did to Jed. I got him killed, and now I'm this." He held up his bloody hands. I'm an animal. I don't know how to be around people anymore." He finally looked at her, his eyes hollow with self-loathing. "I pushed you. I hurt you." "You did," she said, her voice quiet. She climbed the rest of the way into the loft. She walked over to him, her steps measured. He flinched as she knelt in front of him, bracing for her to leave. To yell. She didn't. She just looked at him, at this broken, violent, gentle man. She had seen his rage, and she had seen his scars. She had seen Arthur's rage, which was cold and cruel. Nate's was born of grief, of a terrible, bottomless pain. She reached out and took his bloody, broken hands in her own. She brought them to her face, turned her head, and pressed her cheek against his scabbed knuckles. "I know," she whispered. "I know." He broke. He collapsed against her, his face buried in her lap, and he wept. Not the hot, angry sobs of before, but the exhausted, broken sobs of a child who is lost and has finally been found. Clara held him. She didn't say it was all right. She didn't say it would be fine. She just held his head, stroking his hair, her own tears falling silently into the hay. She held him like a child, this dangerous, broken man who was hers. Later, wordlessly, they made love. It was not about passion, or healing, or even comfort. It was a desperate, quiet clinging in the dark. It was two people who had seen the worst of each other, the rage and the fear, and had not run. It was a wordless promise that they would hold on. The next Sunday, Clara did the unthinkable. She put on her one good dress, a dark wool, and she rode into town, alone. She walked up the steps of the church, her head held high. "Mrs." Davies and the preacher stopped in the doorway, their mouths open. The congregation went silent. Clara walked past them, her steps echoing, and sat in the front pew. She sat there, alone, daring them to judge her. She was done hiding. Nate, meanwhile, was in town at the Mercantile. He had 2 pelts, a fox and a beaver, slung over his shoulder. "Henderson," he said, "I need flour, coffee, and kerosene, and a bag of oats." "That'll be $4.50, Henderson said, his eyes sliding away. "I'm not paying cash," Nate said. He threw the pelts on the counter. "I'm bartering. These are prime. They're worth $6. Easy. You give me my supplies, and a credit for the rest. For Mrs. Dunning." Henderson looked at the pelts. He looked at Nate. He saw the bruises on his knuckles. He had heard about the fire. He had heard about the beating. He nodded, quickly. "Yes, Mr. Burke, right away." Nate was no longer the town ghost. He was the widow's protector, and he was dangerous. They were a unit now. They were a fortress of 2, but they knew it wasn't enough. Garrison owned the valley. They needed alliances. That week, Nate rode to the 2 neighboring homesteads, the ones run by other widows, Mrs. Nash, a thin woman with 3 small children, and Mrs. Gable, an older, grim-faced woman whose husband had died in a blizzard. He didn't threaten. He didn't offer. He just delivered a side of venison to each. "From me and Mrs. Dunning," he said. "We're having a supper. Thursday. We'd be honored if you'd come, to talk. About the spring. About prices." Thursday night, the 2 women arrived at Clara's cabin, their faces nervous. Clara had stew on the fire. Nate was quiet, staying in the background, letting Clara talk. They didn't talk about Garrison. They talked about the cost of feed, about the water, about their banknotes, about survival. When the women left, they were not allies. Not yet, but they were not strangers. Clara had built a quiet, fragile bridge. They were not alone. The fight was just beginning. The fragile alliance they had built, the quiet supper with the widows, had been a single candle in a hurricane. Frank Garrison had no intention of letting it burn. He was a man who understood one thing: power, and he was done playing. He did not send a messenger. He came himself, the next day, just after dawn. The cold was brutal, the sun a weak white eye in a gray sky. He rode onto Clara's land with 3 men, including Calloway, whose face was a swollen, purple mask, his eyes slits of pure hatred. They didn't stop at the fence. They rode right up to the cabin, trampling the remains of Clara's snow-covered garden. Nate was splitting wood by the porch. He set the axe down, slowly, and stood, his body a solid block of ice, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Clara came to the doorway, her face pale, but her spine rigid. "Garrison," Nate said. His voice was flat. "You're trespassing." "Am I?" Garrison smiled, a wide, cold smile. He was bundled in a thick fur coat, looking like a bear on horseback. "I think you'll find, Burke, that this all belongs to me. I'm just here to set a date for the turnover." "I told you, I'm not selling." Garrison's smile faded. "Yes, you did, and you beat my man, and you've been cozying up. You've been a busy little bee." He leaned forward on his saddle horn. "So, I'm done asking. I'm here to give you an ultimatum. 1 week. That's what you have left. You will be at the land office in Laramie Fork next Monday, at noon, and you will sign the sale papers for your ranch, at the price we discussed." "Or what?" Nate said, his voice dangerously quiet. Garrison's smile returned. He looked past Nate, at Clara. "Or I'll have her arrested for cattle rustling." Clara flinched, but said nothing. "That's a lie," Nate said. "Is it?" Garrison shrugged. "She's been seen gathering unbranded strays. We all have. A new homesteader, a lone woman. It's a sad, common story. They get desperate. They start building their herd with other men's property. She's done nothing of the sort. That's the beauty of it, Garrison said, his voice dropping to a confidential purr. It doesn't matter. I have 2 men who will swear they saw her, at night, running my brand. And Judge Peters, he's a very good friend of mine. He takes a hard line on rustling, especially from women of questionable character. He let that hang in the air, a direct reference to the kiss in town. He'll be sympathetic, I'm sure, but he'll have to sentence her. It's the law. She'll get 10 years, at least, in the territorial prison. You know what they do to women in there. Burke. Nate's hand clenched on his gun. Calloway and the other men tensed, their own hands dropping to their holsters. One week, Burke, Garrison said, pulling his horse back. You sign, and I'll find my lost cattle, and the charges will be dropped. You refuse, and I will see her destroyed. Monday, at noon. He turned his horse, and the 4 of them rode away, leaving a dead, sickening silence in their wake. Clara stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, her body trembling. Nate turned to her, his face a mask of stone. He kicked the log he was splitting, a single, violent act, and the wood flew apart.
He can do it,
Clara whispered, her voice hollow.
Nate, he can do it. Judge Peters, he's Garrison's man. Everyone knows it. They'll believe him. They'll send me away.
I won't let him, Nate growled, pacing the small yard. I'll kill him first. I'll burn his whole ranch to the ground.
And get yourself hanged,
she cried, her paralysis breaking. She ran to him, grabbing his arm.
No, Nate, that's what he wants. He wants you to fight, to be the animal he thinks you are. He wants to see you swing.
You can't. So what? He yelled, turning on her. We let him just take you? Throw you in a cell?
No,
she said, her voice breaking. She was crying, her hands clinging to his coat.
You leave?
He stared at her.
What? Leave,
she pleaded, her face desperate.
Go, now, ride out. He doesn't want you, not really. He wants your land, and he wants me gone. If you're gone, he gets the land. He wins. He'll just run me off. He'll do what he said. He'll starve me out. But I can survive that. I can leave. I can go somewhere else. But I cannot survive that. I cannot watch them put a rope around your neck. Please, Nate, leave. Forget me. Save yourself. He looked at her, at this woman who was willing to lose everything. Again, just to keep him safe. He saw her terror, not for herself, but for him, and it broke through his rage, clarifying his mind. He was cornered, she was cornered, and there was only one move left. No, he said, his voice suddenly calm, grim. He took her hands. I'm not leaving you, but he's right about one thing. In that courtroom, Clara Dunning means nothing. She's a widow with a bad reputation, just like he said. Nate, don't. Listen to me, he said, his grip tightening. He's bribed the judge. He's bought his witnesses. It's a legal trap, but there's one thing. A name. My name. The Burke name. My father. He was one of the first men in this valley. He helped build that town. That name. It still means something. It still has weight. Even Judge Peters, he'd have to be careful. What are you saying?
She whispered, her eyes wide, afraid of his answer. Marry me, Clara, he said, the words blunt, not romantic. Marry me, tomorrow. We'll ride to the next county, find a justice. We'll be back before he even knows we're gone. She tried to pull her hands away, but he held her fast.
No, Nate, I told you.
This isn't about that, he said, his voice urgent, desperate.
This isn't about owning you. This isn't about the preacher, or the town, or Arthur.
This is about the law. This is a fight. In that courtroom, he wants to paint you as a lone, desperate woman, but as Clara Burke. You're my wife. You're part of the rocking bee. And a wife cannot be forced to testify against her husband. And her husband can speak for her. In court, he can stand for her. Let me do this, Clara. Let me put my name between you and him. It's not a brand. It's a shield. She looked at him, her heart tearing in two. He was offering her exactly what she had sworn she would never accept. Protection, a man's name, a man's salvation. He saw it as a strategy. She saw it as a cage, the same cage she had just escaped. No, she said, and this time she ripped her hands from his. She backed away, her face a mask of old, deep-seated pain. No, I can't. I won't. Clara, it's the only way. It's your way, she cried, her voice cracking. It's the man's way. Fix it with a name, with a law, with a show of ownership. You don't understand. You still don't understand. What I understand is that you'll be in a cell in a week. And what you don't understand, she shot back, is that I would rather be in that cell as Clara Dunning than be safe as Clara Burke. I will not trade my freedom for a new master. I've lived under a man's name. I've lived under his protection. It cost me my soul. I'd rather lose this land. I'd rather die. But I will not lose myself again. I will not. It was final. Her terror of Garrison was real. But her terror of this, of giving up her essential self, was greater. It was a line she would not cross. Not even for him. Not even for her own life. Nate stared at her. He had offered the only thing he had, the only solution he could see, and she had thrown it back in his face. He felt a cold, bitter wave of frustration and anger. He was trying to save her, and she was fighting him harder than she was fighting Garrison. Fine, he said, his voice dead. He stepped back. Fine, you've made your choice. He turned, his face like stone, and walked to the barn. He didn't saddle his horse. He just bridled it. He grabbed his coat and his rifle. Clara stood on the porch, shaking. Nate, where are you going? I'm done, he said, not looking at her. He swung onto the roan's bare back. You won't let me fight for you, and I'll be damned if I'm going to stand here and watch him tear you apart. You win, Clara. You're on your own. He dug his heels into the roan's side. He didn't ride to his ranch. He rode past her, past the broken fence line, and took the south road, the road that led out of the valley, the road to Cheyenne, the road to everywhere else. Clara watched him go. She stood on the porch until he was a tiny, dark speck against the snow, until he disappeared over the rise. He was gone. She sank onto the new steps he had built, her legs giving way. She had done it. She had refused him. She had chosen her freedom, and it had cost her everything. He was gone. Garrison would be back. She was truly alone. The next 2 days were a living hell. The silence of the homestead was a roaring in her ears. Every gust of wind sounded like riders. Every shadow looked like Garrison. She was a woman on death row. She had 5 days, then 4. She believed he was gone for good. He had run, just as he'd planned to all along. She had just given him the final, perfect excuse. She had pushed him away. She had driven him off. The grief was a physical weight, heavier than her fear of the prison. She had lost him. She packed a small bag with the wooden bird he had given her, a change of clothes, and the last of her money. She couldn't fight. She couldn't stay. She would have to run. She would leave in the night, before Monday. She would become a ghost, just like she had been before Arthur. She had fought so hard, just to end up with nothing. It was the second night. She was sitting at her table, the lamp burning low, her small bag on the floor, trying to find the courage to step out into the dark. She heard a horse, not a group, one horse, moving fast but exhausted, stumbling. She grabbed her rifle, her heart leaping into her throat. She ran to the door, her hands shaking. "Who's there?" A figure almost fell from the saddle. A man, covered in mud and grime, his clothes torn. "Nate," she breathed. He stumbled toward the porch, catching himself on the rail. He was bruised. His knuckles were raw and bloody again. He looked like he had ridden through hell and back, and had gotten in a fight on the way. "Nate," she said, running to him, grabbing his arm.
You're hurt. What happened?"
He just shook his head, too tired to speak. He leaned on her, his weight heavy. He smelled of sweat, horse, and whiskey. "I couldn't," he whispered, his voice a raw rasp. "I couldn't just let him win." He fumbled inside his torn coat, past a new, ugly bruise on his ribs. He pulled out a small, oilskin-wrapped packet. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't open it. I rode to Cheyenne," he gasped, leaning against the doorframe. 2 days, straight. Swapped my horse. Kept going. I went to the Capitol, to the federal land office." Clara just stared at him, uncomprehending. "Garrison," Nate went on, his voice thick. "He's smart. He bought your banknote. He owns your mortgage. He thinks he owns your land, but he missed something. Your husband, Arthur, he filed the homestead claim. He filed for the land, but he never filed for the water." He looked at her, his eyes burning with a feverish, triumphant light. "The creek, the source, it's on federal land, unassigned. Garrison just assumed he'd get it when he foreclosed, but he never filed."
"Nate, what? What did you do?"
I found a clerk. I convinced him," Nate said, glancing at his bloody knuckles, "to find the old maps. I showed him my father's original deeds. I told him about Garrison, about the railroad, about how he was trying to steal the whole valley, and then I paid the fees. I filed the claim." He finally got the packet open. He pushed a folded, official-looking document into her hands. It was covered in stamps and seals. "It's in your name, Clara," he whispered, his breath catching in a half-sob, half-laugh. "Clara Dunning, sole title, patented, federal, Garrison. Garrison can't touch it. The county judge can't touch it. He can have the land. Clara, he can have the dirt. But the water for this entire valley, it's all yours." She stared at the paper. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood. He hadn't run, he had fought, not with his fists, not with a name, but with his mind. He had beaten Garrison at his own game. The confrontation came the very next morning. Garrison wasn't waiting for Monday. He was done. He rode up with Sheriff Harlan and 2 deputies. His face set. "Clara Dunning," Harlan said, his voice full of regret. He swung down from his horse. I have a warrant here, signed by Judge Peters, to search your property for stolen livestock. I'm sorry, ma'am. I have to do this." Garrison sat on his horse, a smug, triumphant look on his face. "It's over, Mrs. Dunning. You should have taken the offer." Nate stepped out onto the porch. He was cleaned up, but his face was bruised, his arm in a makeshift sling. He just stood there, watching. "Sheriff," Clara said, her voice clear and steady. She stepped forward. "Before you do that, perhaps you and Mr. Garrison should read this." She held out the federal patent. Harlan took it, confused. He began to read. His eyes widened. He read it again, his lips moving. He looked up, his face pale. "My God," he whispered. He looked at Garrison. "Frank, this is a federal patent. From the Capitol, it's granting sole title of the water rights. The entire creek, from the source down, it's in her name." Garrison's smile vanished. He spurred his horse forward and snatched the paper from Harlan's hand. He read it, his face turning a dark, mottled purple. "This is impossible," he roared. "This is fraudulent. It's illegal." "It's federal law, Frank," Nate said, his voice quiet from the porch. "Signed and sealed. Your county judge, your bought witnesses. They don't mean much to a U.S. Marshal. And he'll be very interested to hear about a conspiracy to deny a homesteader her federal rights." Harlan took the paper back from Garrison's limp hand and gave it to Clara, his expression a mix of awe and terror.
"Frank, I can't execute this warrant. This changes everything. This document, it gives her senior rights to all the water. If I arrest her, and this is filed, I'll be in a federal prison."
He backed away, putting his hat on. "Deputies, we're done here. This is out of our jurisdiction." The deputies looked profoundly relieved. They turned their horses. "You can't!" Garrison shrieked. "You work for me!" "No, Frank," Harlan said, mounting his horse. "I work for the law, and this is a bigger law than you." He rode off. The deputies followed. Garrison was left alone, his men gone, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He stared at Clara, who stood on her porch, holding the paper. He stared at Nate, who was smiling, a cold, thin smile. Garrison let out a string of curses, a vile, choking sound. He pulled his horse so hard it reared. "This isn't over! Burke, you're dead! You're both dead!" He galloped off, defeated, humiliated. That night, the cabin was quiet. The relief was so deep, it was its own kind of pain. It was over. The siege was broken. Nate was in the hayloft. He was sitting in the corner, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. He was exhausted. He had won. He had done the impossible. And he was just done. He heard the ladder creak. He opened his eyes. Clara was climbing into the loft. She was in her simple white nightdress, her hair down, flowing over her shoulders. The moonlight from the gaps in the roof lit her like a spirit. She walked to him, her feet bare in the hay. She stood in front of him, just looking at him. He looked up, his bruised face full of a deep, profound weariness. He was the man who had ridden to hell for her, and he had not asked for a single thing. She reached up, her hands steady, and touched the buttons at the collar of her nightdress. She undid the first one. "You didn't marry me," she whispered. Her voice was thick. She undid the second button. "You didn't protect me. You didn't save me." The dress gaped open, showing the skin of her collarbone, the skin he had kissed. You went to the Capitol," she said, her voice breaking. You gave me my own name, on my own land. You gave me my life back." She knelt in front of him, the dress sliding off one shoulder. She looked him in the eyes, her own full of a love that was so deep, so absolute. It was a form of surrender. "You don't have to ask again, Nate." He reached out, his rough, bruised hand trembling, and touched her face. He traced her jaw, his thumb brushing her lips. He pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers. They made love in the hay. It was not the desperate, frantic coupling of the storm. It was not the pained, healing touch of their scarred pasts. It was slow. It was deep. It was a quiet, wordless promise that had been sealed in law and was now being sealed in flesh. It was the first time, for both of them, that it felt like home. They were no longer two broken things, surviving. They were one. It was the last time it would feel like an ending, and the first time they both knew, with absolute certainty, that it was a beginning. Winter did not arrive gently. It came with a low, gray sky that sat on the hills for a week, and then one morning, the world was gone, erased by a silent, heavy fall of snow that did not stop for 3 days. The cold that followed was a physical presence, a sharp, clean bite in the air that froze a man's breath to his beard and made the trees crack in the night. The fight with Garrison was over, but the war for survival had begun. This winter, however, was different. It was not two people, isolated and grieving, but one unit. Nate moved his essential things from the cold, ghost-filled house of his father's to Clara's one-room cabin. It was cramped. They were always within arm's reach, but it was warm. The small stove was always hot. The cabin filled with the smell of wood smoke and coffee, and, for the first time in either of their memories, the sound of quiet, shared work. They worked side by side. There was no his or hers. There was only ours. They dug paths through the snow, first from the cabin to her barn, then a long, packed-down trail to his. They hauled hay from his full barn to her small one, Nate's big roan dragging the sledge. They banked the walls of both the cabin and his empty house, using the sod he had taught her to cut. They were preparing both homesteads, two ranches slowly, wordlessly, being forged into one. In the small, bright moments between storms, they would stand on the porch, their breath pluming, and look out over the white, silent valley. His arm would rest, naturally, around her waist. She would lean her head against his shoulder. They were quiet, but the silence was full. It was the quiet of a deep, shared peace, a peace earned with scars and blood and a federal piece of paper. One day, after a thaw had softened the ground near the cabin, Clara was outside, her hands bare, digging in the hard, cold earth. Nate came out of the barn, a hammer in his hand, and stopped. "Clara, it's too cold to plant anything. The ground will freeze solid by nightfall." She looked up, her face smudged with dirt, her hair tied back. She had a small burlap-wrapped bundle at her feet. "It's not for a crop," she said. She pointed to the spot, just under the cabin's main window. "I'm planting lilacs. Here." Nate put the hammer down. He knew, as everyone in the valley knew, that lilacs had been her son's favorite. He had always been stuffing them in his pockets, his little hands smelling of them. She was planting a memory. "They'll die, Clara," he said, his voice gentle. "The freeze." "No, they won't," she said, her voice fierce with a conviction that had nothing to do with gardening. "I'll mulch them. I'll wrap them. They'll sleep, but they'll be here. And in the spring, when the thaw comes, they will bloom." He looked at her, kneeling in the cold mud, planting a flower for a boy who was gone. He saw it was not an act of grief. It was an act of profound, defiant hope. She was no longer just surviving the winter. She was planting for the spring. She was putting down roots. He went back to the barn, his throat tight. He looked at the pile of mismatched, weathered timber they had salvaged from her collapsed roof, the wood that had been the start of it all. He picked up a solid, gray plank, testing its weight. He spent the next 3 days, when he should have been mending tack, in a quiet corner of the barn. He sawed, he planed, he sanded. He was not a fine woodworker, but his hands were sure. When he was done, he brought it to the cabin. It was a rocking chair. It was simple, solid, and built from the old barn wood, sanded smooth as glass, the grain silvered with age. Clara was inside, kneading bread. She turned, her hands white with flour, and just stared at it. I thought you'd like a place to sit," Nate said, his voice rough. "By the fire. It's from the old wood." She walked over, her face pale. She touched the smooth, curved arm. She sat in it, her hands in her lap. It fit her. She rocked, once, twice, the runners making a soft, whispery sound on the plank floor. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, her eyes so full that he had to look away. He had taken the wood of her ruin and built her a place of rest. Word of Garrison's defeat had spread through the valley like a Chinook wind. It had been whispered in Henderson's mercantile. It had been discussed in quiet tones at the saloon. A lone widow and a haunted recluse had faced down Frank Garrison. not with guns, but with a piece of paper from the capital. The giant, it turned out, could be beaten. Garrison was gone. He had ridden out of town the day after his humiliation, his face black with rage. He was on his way to Cheyenne. The talk went to fight the patent, but he had left behind a valley that no longer feared him. The smallholders, who had been cowed, began to hold their ground. Mrs. Nash and Mrs. Gable, the widows Clara had fed, came by with a small sack of sugar and a proposal. They wanted to pool their resources, to buy seed and feed in bulk from Cheyenne, bypassing the co-op Garrison still controlled. Nate agreed to make the ride for all of them. The small alliance, born in Clara's kitchen, had become a quiet, stubborn rebellion. The town, too, began to change. The chill that had surrounded Nate and Clara began to thaw. It happened slowly. First, it was Sheriff Harlan, who rode out himself to deliver their mail. He tipped his hat to Clara, his face full of a new, deep respect. Mrs. Dunning, Mr. Burke, just wanted to see if you needed anything before the next storm. Then, a week later, Clara was invited to teach. The invitation came from Mrs. Harlan, a small, quiet woman who had always been overshadowed by the preacher's wife.
It's my daughters,
she explained, twisting her gloves on Clara's porch.
and Mrs. Nash's children, they can't read, not well, and with the winter, there's no school. We were wondering, you're so well-spoken, Mrs. Dunning, we could pay in flour or thread.
Clara looked at the woman, who had once been part of the silent crowd that judged her, and she saw not a town matron, but a mother, worried for her children.
I will do it,
Clara said.
but not for pay.
You bring them here, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and you bring a book, if you have one. Nate, too, found an awkward path back. He was in town, at the church, which was serving as the town pantry, picking up the supplies for the widows. Preacher Davies saw him, his face a mixture of fear and confusion. The man who had been the town's shame was now its protector. "Mr. Burke," the preacher said, his voice stiff. We are short of hands. The firewood, it's heavy." Nate looked at the preacher. He looked at the pile of wood. He looked at Mrs. Davies, who was pointedly not looking at him, her face pinched as always. He could have walked away. He could have relished his victory. Instead, he just took off his coat. "Where do you want it stacked, preacher?" He worked for an hour, silently, his axe splitting the rounds. The townspeople who came for supplies saw him. Nate Burke, the man who had beaten Garrison, chopping wood for the poor. The coldness was not gone, but it was thawing. The real test came in February. The snow was deep, the valley locked in ice. When a wagon train, small and battered, made its way to Laramie Fork, it was a black family from Colorado. The Colemans, they were former sharecroppers, seeking land, and they had heard of the valley. They were met with a wall of cold, suspicious silence. Henderson wouldn't sell them supplies on credit. The saloon wouldn't serve them. They were left to camp at the edge of town, their children shivering, their resources gone. Nate found them there. He saw the father, a tall, proud man named Moses Coleman, trying to fix a broken wagon wheel, his hands raw. He saw the mother, holding a baby, her eyes wide with fear. Nate went back to his ranch. He spoke with Clara. That afternoon, he rode back to town. He went straight to the land office. He sold a small portion of his land. Not the best part, but a good part. The section by the lower creek. With good water and shelter from the wind, he sold it to Moses Coleman for $1. The town erupted. It was one thing to fight Garrison. It was another thing to sell good land, Burke land, to them. The undercurrent of polite judgment turned. Overnight, into a low, ugly rumble of anger. Men who had nodded to Nate in the street now turned their backs. "It's his land," Sheriff Harlan argued wearily in the saloon.
"He can do what he wants."
"It's not right," a rancher said, slamming his mug down. "It's not natural. It'll bring trouble. That man, Burke, he's bringing ruin." It was the same word they had used for Clara. The next day, Clara was in the mercantile. The room was full. The rancher who had been in the saloon was there, and he was loud. "First he shacks up with the widow. Now he's giving the valley away," the man said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's got no respect. He's no better than his brother, just a hot-headed fool." Clara, who had been counting her change, went very still. She turned. She was not the same woman who had fled this store in humiliation.
"Mr. Peterson,"
she said, her voice not loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. The man, a big red-faced rancher, turned, surprised. "Mr. Burke," Clara continued, "has more respect in his left hand than you have in your entire body. He respects the law. He respects a hard winter. And he respects a man's right to build a home for his family." "Now, Mrs. Dunning," Henderson started, wringing his hands.
"And you," she said, turning to him, "will sell Mr. Coleman whatever supplies he needs, and you will put it on Mr. Burke's credit, the same credit he earned with the pelts he brought you, the pelts that are keeping this town from starving." She turned back to the rancher. "As for his brother, Jed Burke died defending his land. This land, the land you are now standing on. You are not fit to speak his name, not in this store, not in this town. You will apologize, to me and to Mr. Burke." The store was dead silent. The rancher was sputtering, his face crimson. He looked at Clara, at this small, unmovable woman. He looked at the other men, who were watching, their faces grim. He saw he had no allies. He had picked a fight with the wrong woman. I meant no disrespect, ma'am," he mumbled, his eyes on the floor. "Good," Clara said. She turned, picked up her flower, and walked out. The town's coldness had met its match. That night, Nate was sitting on the edge of their bed, cleaning his rifle. Clara was brushing her hair. The cabin was warm, the wind howling outside. The mail from Harlan had brought a letter. It was from St. Louis, from his sister. He had been staring at it for an hour. "You should read it," Clara said softly. I haven't heard from her, not since before." "Read it, Nate." He broke the seal, his hands, so sure on the rifle, fumbled with the paper. He began to read, his lips moving. Then, his voice low and hesitant, he began to read it aloud. To Clara. It was a simple letter. She was well. Her husband was well. Her 2 small children. They were asking about their uncle. They were asking about the West, about the ranch. She missed him. She wanted to know if she could visit. In the summer, if it was safe. Nate stopped reading. He looked at the letter. His sister. His family. The life he had run from. The life he had been running back to. He looked at Clara, her face soft in the lamplight, her hair loose on her shoulders. He thought of his cold, empty ranch house. He thought of her cabin. She wants to bring her children," he said, his voice thick with a new, strange emotion. "Here, to this place." For the first time, he thought of bringing someone back. He thought of his house, not as a tomb, but as a home filled with children, with his sister, with Clara. He saw a future, a real one. "You should tell her yes," Clara said. She put her hand on his. "You should tell her to come. In the summer, the lilacs, they will be in bloom." The final scene. It was a week later. The heaviest snow of the year had fallen, burying the world in a deep, perfect white.
It was a night of impossible, frozen stillness. The moon so bright on the snow it looked like day. Nate and Clara were in the hayloft. Their hayloft. They had made a nest. They were sitting on a thick pile of old quilts, a half-dozen candles burning on a beam nearby, casting a warm, flickering glow. They were wrapped in one blanket, his arm around her, her head on his chest. They were just breathing, listening to the snow fall silently on the roof above them. She shifted, looking up at him, at his bruised, scarred, beautiful face. "You were going to leave," she said, her voice a soft murmur in the quiet. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, a miracle. He looked down at her. He thought of the man he had been, the man full of ghosts, standing on that porch, waiting for the surveyor. He thought of the train ticket he had planned to buy. He thought of the cold, empty life he had been running toward. "I was going to die," he replied, his voice thick. "I was just too stubborn to pull the trigger, but I was dying. Every day." He touched her face, his rough fingers gentle on her skin. You brought me back, Clara. You and this stubborn, awful, beautiful land." She raised her head. She kissed him. It was a long, slow kiss. It was not the desperate kiss of their first meeting. It was not the angry kiss of the storm. It was not the defiant kiss in the street. It was a kiss of arrival. It was a kiss that tasted of home. The candlelight flickered. Outside, the snow fell, covering the scars of the land, covering the graves, covering the new, small buds of the lilacs. The camera, the eye, faded back, leaving their silhouettes in the warm light of the loft. Two small, strong figures, wrapped in old quilts, surrounded by hay, and warmed, finally, by a love that had begun in ruin, but had taken root, and would survive. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope it brought a piece of the Old West to you. We would be honored if you would comment and let us know where you are listening from, anywhere in the world. Please consider subscribing to our channel, From Wild West, for more stories like this one. We read every comment, so please, share your thoughts with us in English. We look forward to hearing from you.